It is 13 minutes past 7 o'clock. Great to have your company this Friday. Now, advocates to end youth homelessness say the situation is getting worse, with young people being shut out of emergency housing and left with nowhere to go, including those fleeing domestic violence. They're holding a Hikoi in Tamaki Makaurau tomorrow down Queen Street and say it's time for the government to step up, listen and act. Joining me now is Kickback founder Aaron Hendry. Morning to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Morning, Jordan.
Look, I mean, inevitably, the question that comes to mind first is why is youth homelessness getting worse, and is it a matter of poor policy making?
Yeah, look, youth homelessness has been a crisis for a very, very long time, and successive governments have failed to respond to it adequately. But what we're seeing is some very clear decisions that the government is making right now that is exacerbating the issue. One of those decisions is the reforms around emergency accommodation and the welfare system. So we're seeing more and more young people going into work and income, being denied shelter and going back onto the street, which just shows how dangerous it can be to experience homelessness. The reforms around the welfare system in terms of increased sanctions as well. We're seeing more and more young people who are experiencing homelessness are being sanctioned because they can't engage with the system the way it is demanding they engage with it. And in many cases, their experience of homelessness is getting worse and it is exacerbated.
Yeah, look, I want to dig into the emergency housing reform as well. I mean, there's been the conversation floated about that the minister tasked with emergency housing has been fudging the numbers to make it look good, but inevitably questions are raised about where do these people go. What do you make of criticism like that? Is that fair?
Yeah, I guess what we've seen is that the door has been shut. Instead of providing a solution for people in crisis, what the government appears to have done is said, look, there isn't there's no solution here. The solution is the street. If we look at the budget, actually, and you look at some of the decisions that were made in the budget,
Yeah.
it's been really clear that homelessness is increasing. You just have to walk around, in any major city centre, you see more and more people on our streets. Our experience, Kickback, is being that young people increasingly are experiencing homelessness and more young people are sleeping rough as a result of some political decisions that are being made. But instead of making a really targeted decision to invest in a strategy to respond to, tamariki and rangatahi homelessness, the government has poured more money into the justice system. They've poured more money into, boot camps and child prisons rather than putting money into building housing and solutions. And what that says to us is there's a decision to house homeless children in prison rather than provide the support and care that they need in the community to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And that's really disappointing to us. We know that something can be done to prevent homelessness for children. We know that more can be done to ensure that our young people have safe, stable housing and are cared for well. But our government's just not making the decisions they need to be making to look after our kids.
Right. Look, I want to make the point as well. In terms of, in January, the government celebrated reducing the number of people in emergency housing motels by 3/4. That's 5 years ahead of the deadline. Again, it sounds good, but what's your reaction to it?
Yeah, look, we're concerned that that's not an accurate number of the actual need that is out there. Again, our experience has been with our young people, what our young people are telling us is that they're going into work and they're asking for support for emergency housing. They're being denied. They're going back onto the street where at times they're sleeping rough, other times they're going into environments where they're actually unsafe and it's quite dangerous for them. And so we don't think that number actually reflects the crisis of homelessness and youth homelessness that is being experienced by our people.
I mean, look, as well, I'm keen from your experience and what you're seeing on the ground, in terms of you could perhaps paint the picture of how homelessness is impacting our Pacific communities. Are you seeing that?
Mm. Yeah, look, Māori and Pacifica disproportionately, impacted, and we're seeing same in terms of those who have come through our doors. There's a huge percentage that are from Māori and Pacifica communities. And again, like there's some real questions here around the failure to really respond to that need. We know that, there's some real crisis around just access to housing for our Māori and Pacific whānau, and the kind of wraparound care and support that is needed for our young people. The system that has been designed doesn't often work through our Rangatahi Māori and Rangatahi Pacifica, right? Some real gaps in terms of not just access to services, but, mental health services, physical health services, the sort of services that whānau often need to care for their kids and to stabilize things. They just aren't there. When we're talking about a homelessness crisis, it's not just a homelessness crisis, right? It's often a house crisis. And when a young person ends up on the street, they've often been failed from absolutely every step of the way. There's a whole system that has been designed that hasn't been designed to meet their needs. Yeah. And so we need to start really stepping back and saying, look, what is going on in our communities? Why is it that Māori and tangata moana whānau are overrepresented in this crisis? And what do we need to start doing differently to engage and listen to our communities and start responding to their needs?
Is overcrowding deemed as being homeless? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, look, under New Zealand's definition of homelessness, overcrowding is one definition. And part of that potentially is the question around how we build our communities, how we build our cities, that we often don't build enough developments that really take into account the needs of our whānau, right? Well, especially when we're thinking of large whānau living in community together, and not having homes that can really accommodate that. That's a structural issue. That's an issue of policy. That's an issue of, people designing homes that don't reflect the needs of the community they're building it.
Yeah, gotcha. Hey, look, I mean, if we read between the lines here, this is purely just my opinion on it. But if we take a look at the coalition and its sentiment, ever since coming into power, it's been a tough love kind of perspective and policy making in the sense of, I'll give you a handout, not a handout. What do you make of just that kind of whole narrative that's been coming from the coalition since it came into power?
Yeah, look, I think the narrative really fails to understand what is happening in the lives of our people. And, when especially we think about our young people, there's this narrative around, there needs to be a little bit of love, but actually, you need a stick to motivate them. But the majority of, all of our young people, the young people that we serve, the young people that are part of our community, are kids that have had nothing but stick their whole lives. We've experienced some of the worst there is to experience around inequality and poverty and injustice in Aotearoa. And they continue to survive and they continue to fight. And this Hikoi that's happening tomorrow is a Hikoi that has come and been birthed out of pain and suffering. It is a Hikoi that has come about because our Rangatahi have said, look, we're not going to allow the system and the pain, the trauma that's been imposed on us to define us. We are standing up and we are going to have our voices heard. And we're going to transform this pain into action and transform our grief into hope.
Yeah.
And that is what tomorrow is about. It's about not being silent. Youth homelessness has been a hidden issue that's been under the rug for a very, very long time. Yet our young people have experienced it. They've known it's been going on. Often our youth workers in our communities have known that this has been going on. This is about us actually bringing it out into the open and starting to say, look, you have a huge amount of rangatahi and tamariki. We're seeing children as young as 11, something 9 turning up at our centre on Kairoi who are experiencing homelessness. This is not okay in Aotearoa. This should not be the way we as a society function. We have some of our most vulnerable kids sleeping on our streets or living without safe and stable housing. We can do something about it. Even homelessness can be solved. And so we're bringing that out into the open and demanding the government listen and start acting.
Yeah. Look, let's turn our attention more specifically to tomorrow's Hikoi in the sense of, I believe, so where does it start from? From K Road to Britomart? Is that the path?
Yeah. So we'll be meeting at K Road, 307 K Road. It's right outside our youth hub, which is an outreach space for rangatahi to come in and drop in and get support and care. And we're going to be walking down the path, down Queen Street and ending at Britomart, where we'll be having kōrero and our rangatahi and others will be giving speeches. And it's been really intentional from our young people to stay on the footpath. When the reforms around emergency housing came out, many of our young people had the experience of going into work and income, being denied shelter and being turned out onto the street. And that has basically been the solution that our government has provided for our young people, the city streets. And so our young people are saying, look, we're reclaiming this, we're taking this back. If you said we had to be on the street, well, here we are. Look at us, see us in our numbers and listen to us.
Mm. Okay. And I mean, what responsibility or duty to assist, I suppose, would you like the government to take in response to youth homelessness? I know there's no silver bullet, but ultimately, what would you like to see from government?
Look, there's a range of demands that our young people have. One is there needs to be a strategy, a clear strategy outlined and resource to actually prevent and end youth homelessness. We need to get smart. We need to get strategic on that. Two, we need to have due to assist legislation embedded within Aotearoa. So duty to assist legislation is basically law that would say that if anyone walked into work and income and needed support and they were at risk of experiencing homelessness, our state agency would have an obligation to provide the support they could provide to prevent that person from experiencing homelessness. It seems pretty simple. And that is all that we're asking, that there is that duty imposed upon our state agencies to care for our children and our young people and provide them the support they need. And we also need to ensure that we're building public housing, and we've got a strong public housing build plan, but also within that young people are prioritized. Young people can get access to that public housing as well. So, there's some clear actions that we can make. And again, we go back to this point that youth homelessness is solvable. This is not something that has to exist. This is not something that must continue within our society. We can fix it. That our government needs to make some really clear decisions to start responding to this and start making the steps that they need to take to ending this. Another queer, example of decisions that have been made that have led us to this point today is in that, the budget prior to this, we had $20 million cut from youth housing initiatives that would have provided housing for young people experiencing homelessness, right? Those services don't exist today because the money was dragged out of the budget. We need to ensure that our government is prioritizing, safe, supported housing for young people and putting that money into our budget so that our young people can be housed and can be supported. One thing that we talk about this corridor is often there's a lot of blame that gets put on whānau, blame that gets put on parents. But the reality is that things go wrong in whānau. We have disagreements with our teenagers. We have stuff that happens with our kids. But when stuff happens and we're trying to work things out, we should have a safety net within our society that means that our children don't have to sleep on the streets. And that is the responsibility of our government, to ensure that our most vulnerable in our society have a safety net, have a safe place to go. And that responsibility right now is being neglected.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And look, final question for you, and this is just perhaps food for thought. Has the Ministry for Social Development or Work and Income, is it fit for purpose now, or dare I ask, has it ever been fit for purpose, do you think?
Well, we think that system, the work and income system, is not designed well for people in crisis, right? It is not a system that understands people that have high levels of trauma, who are struggling with, the realities of survival when you're in an experience of homelessness, who are struggling with high and complex mental health and addiction needs. It's not a service that is accessible for people who are in critical need. And so we do think there needs to be a review of the way that system is designed and that system has worked. One of the things that Kickback does, we work closely with MSD to have a liaison where instead of a young person going to work and income, they come to us. We do the work, we support them, and we do the best we can to get the best for them, rather than those young people going into that environment. And I think that's a model we need to start looking at across the country. Instead of having our work and income officers, how do we actually ensure that our governments are partnering with our local communities, putting power back into the hands of community and allowing us to serve and care for our young people? Because we can do a much better job serving our whānau and serving our communities than some of the systems that have been designed for our communities.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for that, and all the best with the Hikoi tomorrow as well. That is Kickback founder Aaron Hendry. Have a good rest of your day, eh?